We also have our another corporate sponsor, GeneSeek, is going to come up and talk to us a little bit about some of the products that they have. We've got Michael Wells here, Jim Gibbs is here, John Patterson. We've got a nice group from GeneSeek here, and they were one of the corporate sponsors for this event, and we thank them for that. We'll also have a little closing thoughts from Dale Miller, and then we'll turn you loose and let you go drink something cold and frosty. Mine might be a sparkling water. Actually, that's what I cracked a few minutes ago, just in case anybody heard something up here. So I've known Jared Decker for several years. I don't know how far back we go in our younger careers, but Jared and I guess we weren't related in our education pedigree, but we were neighbors. Jared got his PhD with Jerry Taylor at the University of Missouri, and I got my PhD with Mike Smith, literally right across the hallway from him, so we would bump into each other walking in and out of the doors. Dr. Decker originated from New Mexico, comes from a small farm in New Mexico, moved to Missouri to get his PhD, and he did postdoc there too, didn't you, with Dr. Taylor? And I was on faculty there, beef extension specialist. He also writes the blog, The Steak in Genomics, which is an excellent resource. I would highly recommend you all check it out. And Dr. Decker is going to share with us how to take this technology home and use it in the real world to make improvements in what you see. So thanks, Chair.
So, can you hear me okay? So hopefully I'm preaching to the choir today, and as I talk to you, I'll give you some sound bites and ideas to share with your commercial customers and other seed stock producers you work with to encourage the adoption of all of the technologies that we've talked about today and just technology in general. So I wanted to have this a little bit of a conversation. So one of the first questions I wanted to hear about from you all are what are your commercial customers' values and what are your values as farmers and ranchers? And I'm patient, I'll wait for answers.
We don't have any values.
Values as far as technology, you mean, or?
No, just what motivates you as a farmer and rancher? What are your ethics? What are things that you value in your day-to-day life? Profit?
Well, that's what it is. It's profit. You know,
Okay.
We got to be profit driven. We've got to make the customers profitable in a way that they get paid for it.
Okay.
Our independence to help us. We don't want to be controlled by government or a big company.
Great.
Family, probably number one in our operation would be family.
Family? Any other?
High value in our field is the way it makes us feel when customers are satisfied. The appreciation from customers is a priceless thing that is worth a lot.
Friends.
Yep.
Friends? Great. So one of the things that I think, I appreciate all of those answers. One of the ideas that came to my mind, and one of the things that I think is commonly seen in the beef industry, is we value tradition, right? This is my grandfather. In this, so don't throw the tomatoes at me for having a Hereford up here on the slides. I wish I had a picture of my favorite steer. His name was Fido. He was named Fido because he followed me around like a dog, and he was a black, blaze-faced, Simmental-looking steer. So I've always had a sweet spot in my heart for Simmentals. But this is my grandfather, and here he is at a Colorado bull sale. And this bull here sold for $1,000. He had another bull in that sale that sold for about $2,700. And so one time I figured out what that would be in today's purchasing power, and that would be about $20,000 in that ballpark. So he was quite successful at what he did. And I think about him often, and hope that I am making him proud in the way that I am living my life and working as a scientist and an educator. But in the beef industry, we do value those traditions. I'm going to make the argument to you all that science and technology has been a tradition in the U.S. since its inception. So we have Benjamin Franklin here, who investigated electricity, developed the lightning rod technology. Monty, earlier today, showed the picture of the Wright brothers. I remember one of the favorite books I read as a kid was the biography about the Wright brothers and their journey to developing the airplane. So another instance where we really value that science and that technology. Earlier we've had pictures about putting a man on the moon. You know, if we think back to the Cold War, the Russians were really ahead of us in the space race, and we decided we needed to get our act together, and we did, and we beat them to the moon. So science and technology has always been a tradition of the United States of America. In fact, I even argue that it's one of the things that made America great. One of the things that made America a leader in terms of a world power was the way in which we grabbed onto science and technology. You know, another person I think of is Eli Whitney with the cotton gin or some of those other things. But one of the things I'm concerned about is, as a nation, as citizens, do we still value science and technology in this same way today? You know, I think there are some headlines in the news that can really make you question whether we do value science and technology that same way. You know, we hear concerns about vaccines, and those concerns about vaccines have been proven to be wrong, and people still ignore the science and the evidence. You know, GMOs have been proven to be safe, and irrationally, we still have people who are against them. So National Geographic and others have kind of talked about this war on science. You know, I'm a little bit concerned about this in the beef industry as well. You know, when we look at things, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but we've had technologies that have been around for 40 years. The other meat industries, pork, poultry, others that we compete against, man, they've adopted and grabbed onto genetic prediction. And I think there's still a lot of beef producers who ignore that technology, if not outright just disbelieve it. So I want to play a little bit of a game with you all for a little bit. I've got 3 doors here. Behind one door, I've got that donor cow that's going to make you famous. Behind the other 2 doors, I've got a broke mouth cow who needs to go to market, a call cow, and I've got an infertile cow that needs to go to market. So I've got 2 call cows and a great donor. Who wants to play the game? Who wants to pick a door? Okay. Which door? 3. Okay. I'm going to open door number 2 and show you a call cow in that door. Okay. So we take door number 2 away. Now I'm going to offer you another decision. Do you want to keep door number 3, or do you want to switch it for door number 1?
Oh wow, I just don't know. I need one of those guys. Switch. Pick one.
Okay, you pick one. In this case, the door was number 3. So your switch ended up and you losing, you ended up with the call cow. Let's play another time. Who wants to play next?
My water.
Okay. Pick a door. Two. Okay. So I'm going to open door number 3. There we have a call cow.
I'm gonna switch.
You're going to switch to door number 1. Okay. You pick the door with the call, you pick the door, your switch, you lost the game. So you guys aren't helping me out with this actual playing of the game. Let's go back in the back. Pick a door. Number 2. Okay. I'm going to open up door number 3 and show you a call cow. Do you want to stay with door number 3 or do you want to switch to door number 1?
I want to work.
Stay.
Always said it's switch. I want more information.
Okay, let's talk about that more information. So at the beginning of the game, the odds of the donor cow being behind each of the doors is 1/3, okay?
Always said it's switch.
So let's say in this example, we're gonna pick door number 1, okay? I'm gonna open door number 2 and show you that there's a call cow behind door number 2. Now at this point, I'm gonna say, do you want to switch or do you want to stay, right? What is the probability at this point of the game that the donor cow is in door number 1 that we picked?
50%.
50%. Everybody kind of in agreement with that?
2/3.
It's actually wrong. So just because I open door number 2, that doesn't change those initial probabilities. So the probability that donor, that famous donor is behind door number 1 is still 1/3. So that means the probability that the donor is not in door number 1 is 2/3. And so that's why all these smart people up front kept switching, is because they knew this Monty Hall problem where it's always more probable for you to switch. So the winning strategy in the long run is to switch, because you have a 2/3 probability that winning door is going to be not the door that you didn't pick.
Yeah, but didn't those smart people lose?
That's why I said the long run. We should have played this game for 100 times. We just didn't have the time to
It
play
doesn't
that
matter,
game.
Wade would have still lost. So, wait a minute, where's my cow?
You never decided to stay or switch.
I wanted more information, I wanna know her genetics, ability.
I think you picked door number 2, and in your game the cow is behind door. No, I don't remember now. Sorry.
Just tell me lost.
The point is our human intuition sometimes isn't very good with this science and technology thing. There's tricky things that happen in the world that we really can't understand clearly or correctly unless we use science and technology. And so the purpose of genetic prediction, the purpose of genomic prediction, the purpose of the marketing strategies that we were talking about earlier, all of these things are to help us aid our fallible human intuition and make better decisions. Another value that I have is legacy, right? I think in the beef industry, so here's my 2 boys, and I want to make sure that 20 years from now, 50 years from now, if they choose, there's a beef industry for them to be a part of. You know, when my dad was growing up as a teenager, every summer he would work as a sheep herder for his uncle. You know how many sheep there are around my hometown these days? Not very many. You know, there's probably some club lambs, and that's probably about it. So I want to make sure that there's a legacy for these boys to inherit. The beef industry, we value this. That's why we give awards like Century Awards, Bicentennial Awards, 5-generation farms, those type of things. We value and we award people for this perseverance, for this sustained success. You know, there came this buzzword, sustainability, and I really appreciate NCBA for redefining this word in a way that works for the beef industry. So I like the definition that they use, that sustainability is profit, some of the values you talked about at the beginning, environmentally conscious, so we want to make sure that we're using these resources in an appropriate and acceptable manner, and then in a socially conscious way. We want to make sure that when a producer, when a consumer, when a consumer goes to the meat counter and buys beef, they can do so with clear conscience, knowing that that animal was grown in a way in which their animal welfare was appropriate. You know, by 2050, the projections are that we'll need to feed 9 billion people, and so the worldwide population continues to grow. The other thing that we're seeing is that as third world countries develop their economy and have a higher standard of living, they want more of that beef product. So we need to make sure that we are optimizing our ability to produce beef. This rejection or this avoidance of technology has an opportunity cost. Okay? If we don't use the technology, we're leaving resources on the table. So if we look at a genetic trend for marbling for one of the breed associations, we see from 1995 up until 2008, we see a pretty steady trend in improvement in genetic merit for marbling. In 2008, they had some genetic defects discovered in that breed, and what happened is there were some outdated policies that didn't utilize new technologies that limited the way in which breeders could manage that genetic defect. And so because of the way, based on that breed's bylaws, that genetic defect was managed, they basically lost steam for 3 years for genetic trend for that trait, and it took them a couple of years to get back to where they should have been. Basically, they didn't get back to where they should have been. They lost from 2008, and they finally got back to where we would have projected them to be by 2014. Okay, so there is an actual cost of not doing things according to how science and technology would suggest that we should do them. Dave Nichols, who's here, I told him I wouldn't embarrass him too much. A couple of years ago, I was in a feed efficiency advisory board meeting with him, and he talked about the need for seed stock producers to be educators. And that really stuck with me, right? There's only one of me basically for the entire state of Missouri. There's only one extension specialist who's in charge of beef genetics. So I have limited opportunities to touch people and to touch farmers and ranchers and to influence how those cattle are selected and managed. You all have contact and interactions with beef producers probably each and every day, right? And so if you can take some of the messages that we're talking about in this meeting today and help your customers be more successful and adopt these technologies, you're going to help them, you're going to help you're going to help yourself as well. This is one of my friends back in Missouri, Ron Locke, and he told me a story once about how he had a producer come to his farm and was wanting to buy a bull. Okay, so this producer explained to him why he was needing the bull, and basically he was able to find out that he was needing a Catanese bull. So this producer went out in the pen and basically selected a bull by visual appraisal. The bull that he picked, Ron knew, was not a Cabanese bull. And so he told him he was not going to sell him that bull because he knew it wasn't going to do the job that he needed it to do. He refused to sell him the bull he picked because he knew that the Cabanese direct EPD pointed him to other bulls in that pen that he should have used. And so he turned down a sale, one, because he didn't want that customer to be unhappy with his purchase, but two, it was also kind of a tough love educational experience for that producer. And it really showed, I think, the dedication to data that Ron has. Most of you have one of these, right? A cell phone. How many of you can explain to me how a cell phone actually works? The nuts and bolts, theory, science of how it works. Anybody? I have no clue how this thing works. But I do know when I call a family member, I hear their voice on the other end of the line. I know when I need to get directions to Semitol headquarters for the opening gala last night, this phone will help me get there. So I have no idea about how it works, but I know that it does work. And so some of the things that we talk about today, and as we talk about genetics and genomics, you don't actually need to know how they work. That's not knowledge you need to have. What you do need to know is that they do work. And you can have that trust in the technology and put it to use for you and your customers. Some of the messages that I'm trying to get out, and I would recruit you to try to get out as well, is the trust and the effectiveness of these beef breeding best practices and the new technologies we have. When a breeder consistently uses Cabanese direct to select a Cabanese bull, the majority of the time they're going to make that right decision. The simplicity of using selection indexes and genomic technologies. Talking earlier today, we can open up a sire catalog or we can do an internet search and we're going to be inundated with lots and lots of options, right? One of the things that the selection indexes does is it takes that long list, ranks them, and we can go to the top of the list, and now our search space is much smaller, and so it really simplifies that decision that we need to make. The other message I'd encourage you to get out is the profit and sustainability outcomes of using these correct strategies and these new technologies. If you buy a yearling bull with little or no data versus buying bulls with genomic enhanced EPDs, you're going to do better in the long run by using those bulls with that genomic data behind them. You're going to make decisions better, you're going to take less risk, and you're going to limit your opportunities to make bad decisions. As educators, which I'm encouraging you all to be, there's resources available. So as Jackie mentioned, I write a blog. There's also this ebeef.com website that is a group of 6 of us that are extension educators across the U.S. And we put resources on that website for you all to use. Okay, so I'm going to rant a little bit now. I think some of you, I suggested maybe you should have some tomatoes ready to throw at me. This is from a survey Beef Magazine did. And they asked commercial breeders, what are the criteria you use when buying a bull? Well, the number one criteria was the actual birth weight of the bull. That birth weight is going to be influenced by its dam's environment, the maternal environment it was growing in, lots of different factors, right? And so when you make your decision based on that birth weight, that actual birth weight, you're buying the environment and the genetics when really what you want to be buying is the genetics. Then the next choice is still not the economically relevant trait. It's the birth weight EPD. Finally, to the third point, we get to an economically relevant trait in calving ease direct. So there's still a lot of work here that we need to do in directing commercial producers to using these EPDs and using them well. So one of the messages we really need to get across is this 30, 40-year-old technology of EPDs. It works, and we need to use it. Let's talk a minute about the strategies we use for making selection decisions. So let's say I need to find a bull to breed to some heifers, and I want a bull that is maternal and I can use to keep replacements. So I'm going to say I'm going to put calving ease direct as one of my traits and weaning weight as one of my traits. I can put these truncation lines and say he needs to have a calving ease above 7, weaning weight above 55, and so these would be my selection candidates over here in this rectangle. This approach has some real weaknesses and flaws. So these bulls right here, they're pretty outstanding for weaning weight, but they barely miss that calving ease cutoff. Over here, we've got some bulls that are acceptable, that would be acceptable in terms of weaning weight growth and really excel at calving ease, but they miss that arbitrary cutoff, and so we don't include them. In green, I've highlighted the ranking for the top 5% for the maternal index. And so you see that there's lots of bulls that combine these two traits in an appropriate way. But in addition to these two traits, they also have excellent merit for things like mature size or milking ability or other traits that go into this maternal index. And this bull right here, at the time I made this slide, was the #1 bull in his breed for this maternal index, and we would have completely missed him based on this truncation selection approach. So I would really encourage you to use those indexes, point your commercial customer to those indexes. As we start producing predictions for many more traits, you know, the health traits that Dorian was encouraging us to collect data on, those other things, we're going to have more and more data to look at, and we really want to avoid this data overload scenario. The indexes simplify things because it's going to take all of that data and put it in one value for us to look at. It's a lot easier to look at one value than 12 different values or 20 different values or whatever it may be. So let's say that I'm trying to find this calving ease bull, and so I'm going to look at the actual birth weight, the birth weight EPD, and the calving ease EPD. And my hope is that by looking at these three different numbers at the same time, I'm going to increase my odds, my chances of making a good decision. But what has happened is the actual birth weight EPD, the actual birth weight record goes into calculating the birth weight EPD, and that birth weight EPD goes into calculating the calving ease EPD. And so what I've done with this scenario is I've actually triple counted this actual birth weight information. And so our human intuition thinks if we do this double and triple counting, we're going to improve the decision we're going to make. But that's actually the opposite of what happened. When we do this double and triple counting, we're actually going to decrease the precision of our prediction. So don't double count. Find the sources of information, usually the indexes, that take all of the information into account and use those. So how do I increase the precision, the reliability of my selection decisions? the simple answer is we simply need to put more data into those EPD calculations. And one of the ways that we can do that is by using genomics to produce genomic enhanced EPDs. Okay, I want to let you all in on a little secret, and I think some of Bob Hughes' questions and comments earlier today kind of talked about this. So let's talk about accuracy versus precision for a second. Here we've got 5 shot attempts, 5 estimates, where we're trying to hit this target. And so these 5 estimates have low precision because they're spread out. They also have low accuracy because on average, they're missing the mark. So we can increase the precision of that, and so we've decreased the spread in those predictions. But they're still biased because they're missing the mark, okay? If we have high accuracy predictions, if we average these 5, we're hitting the mark. If we average these 5, we're hitting the mark. So these 2 sets of estimates are unbiased and they're accurate. And so the EPD accuracy that we talk about, in my mind, is really more a measure of the reliability or the precision of that EPD. Because all EPDs, because they're calculated under certain statistical methods, are unbiased. All EPDs are accurate. That means if you use EPDs as your selection tool, in the long run, you're always going to hit your target. Let's see, so these EPDs, they might miss on individual animals, right? That's not the way to validate or look at an EPD. These EPDs are really made to win in the long run, right? So when we played that Monty Hall door game, in that short 3 contest, our strategy of switching missed. But if we would have played that game for the long run, for 100 times, 1,000 times, that switching strategy would have won out in the long run. Another comment Bob Hugh made earlier today is this data and information that's coming out that weaning weights really aren't increasing over the last 20 years, okay? So Dave Lawman has talked about this a couple of times at BIF. Here's a blog post I wrote about it. So I have 2 theories about why this is happening. I don't think it's a weakness or a flaw in EPDs. I think it's A, producers simply aren't using EPDs. And that beef survey supports that, right? The #1 selection criteria of 72% of producers is using that actual birth weight. So I don't think we have the total adoption of EPDs that we really need to see that genetic progress that we would like to see. The other explanation could simply be that the environment is limiting the expression of that genetic potential. So this is data from one of our research centers in the University of Missouri system. And this herd has been very progressive in terms of using artificial insemination and using sires with proven EPDs. And so if we look at the phenotypic trends, so not the genetic trends or anything like that, this is actual phenotype changes. We've seen the weaning weight increasing by about 1.5 pounds per year. So that's not the 2 pounds that we see in the Angus database, but it's a lot bigger than 0, okay? Let's talk about the environment. What's the solution to this? In my mind, the solution is matching the genetics of that animal, of that cow in particular, to the environment in which she has to work in. So we have a grant funded by the USDA in order to look at this problem. And again, you can get on my blog to hear more about that, read more about it. But basically, what we're trying to do is look for selection between these different regions of the United States and ultimately produce region-specific genetic predictions. So what one of my students has done is he's taken this 30-year historical data from Oregon State University, and he's done a statistical analysis, and using that, we can break the United States up into regions. And so these regions make some intuitive sense. Down here we've got the Gulf Coast, we've got what I'd call the Fescue Belt here, we got high altitude and the challenges it faces over here, the desert Southwest, upper plains, those type of things. So if an animal is adapted to the region it needs to produce in, it's going to perform well, it's going to meet your selection criteria, you're going to retain it in the herd, and it's going to produce progeny, okay? So the beneficial DNA variants that that animal carries is going to increase in frequency. If an animal is not adapted to your climate, to your environment, it's going to underperform, and it's going to get calls from the herd, and any of the DNA variants that it carries that are not beneficial, that are unfavorable, are going to be selected against and decrease in frequency. So this selection is going to change the frequency of these DNA variants that are responsible for the local adaptation between the different regions of the United States. So with this research, we'll be able to identify selection for traits that we haven't measured, things like heat, cold, altitude, humidity, arid, perhaps parasite load, perhaps immunity, perhaps feed intake, and many other traits that we would never even think or imagine that we should actually be measuring. And so we're going to use lots of different methods to try to get at this. And we're going to utilize the history of selection across all of the regions of the United States. The ultimate endpoint is a genomic enhanced EPDs, a genomic prediction that's tailored to the individual regions in the United States. So I want to just put up a toy example to explain what I mean by this. So here we're in environment 1. Let's say this is the Upper Plains, and we've got bull A and bull B. So their weaning weight EPDs vary, the other EPDs vary, and so the bull A, we're going to say his index value is worth $10 more, okay? If we go and we analyze these same bulls in a different environment, the ranking is now going to swap because that bull A, his progeny, are sensitive to some of the environmental stressors there in environment 2. And so now his ranking goes down to a $40, this bull B, his goes up to 43. So this is hopefully the outcome of what this research will be, and hopefully what we'll be able to do is if you're in the Fescue Belt or if you're in the Gulf Coast or whatever challenging region you're in, you can open up a sire catalog, and that sire catalog will have EPDs that are tailored to your environment. So when you select those bulls to produce daughters, you can have some confidence that there's some data and analysis behind that decision. So with that, that's kind of the messages that I had to share with you today. I would just encourage you again to think about what can I do to really grasp this idea of embracing science and technology, applying it in my own operation, and also helping my customers adopt that strategy as well. Any questions?
Yeah, Jared, thank you for bringing this down to a level we can all understand easily. I really appreciate it. I guess, would you visit with us a little bit about what you're talking about? I think the message maybe instead of maximizing weights, we need to optimize. Is that correct?
So
For our environments?
yeah, so it might be, you know, it might be other biological processes that have nothing to do with growth, right? So one of the stresses that we deal with in Missouri is fescue toxicity, okay? So when those cows get that fescue toxin in their system, it causes all their periphery blood vessels to constrict, okay? When you're in the heat of summer, you need those vessels to dilate and get bigger, not to constrict, okay? And so perhaps there's biological processes influenced and controlled by genes that some cows won't constrict those blood vessels as much when they're faced with that fescue toxin. You know, high altitude has many of those same challenges in terms of vasoconstriction. Okay, so it might be matching the mature size to our environment. It might be matching the milk production to our environment, but it might be some of these other biological processes that we just haven't thought about yet. And so what we'll really do is we'll have the DNA data guide us to those things.
Jared, you had to kind of remind me of this birth weight issue, which we all face. I mean, one year the average is 82 pounds, and the next year the average is 87 pounds, and it's due to environment. And we all read the survey where our customers look at actual birth weights. 2 years ago, when we had the opportunity to do DNA, Jim Gibbs, and I don't know where Jim is, but thanks, Jim. We sometimes meet at Johnson's Corners for a cinnamon roll, and I said, how do we DNA test everything? And we did, but we traded actual birth weights for DNA. So we wrote it up in the catalog like, dear producer, we're taking away birth weights. And I was pretty scared, but we did. So we subtracted birth weights and said we're going to trade DNA to enhance the accuracy, but I'm taking away birth weights. And we did. And this is the second year we did it. And the point I'm going to make is that this year we complimented producers for accepting it. And I'm going to do a sell job on you now, because it's one thing for one producer to do it, but it's another thing for other producers to use it against you, because they will. I guarantee you they will. Like, what's he trying to hide? We all know what we do with the big birth weight cattle. We castrate them, we don't sell them. But other producers will use that against you. You must be trying to hide something. And I think as Simmental or composite or whatever we are, it would enhance us all to just use it as an educational tool to just do away with it and move toward that. And with genomics, we can enhance it. We saw it today. What is it equal to? 7 progeny or 8 progeny, or cavities even higher. Like, let's move toward that and put it in there, and then compliment the producers for utilizing genomics. I mean, I don't know, Jim, it's been thousands of dollars that I personally spend. Some of you guys have spent a lot more. You might as well trade that in for something. Trade it in for educating the producer to utilize it. So I would just say now's a great time to use it and utilize it for our own benefit. So I just had to remind myself, digging out the catalog, to look. I'm not going back. And I didn't really hide it. I put it on my website. I said, guys, if you want it, there it is. I'm not trying to hide anything, but you're going to have to go hunt for it. And a few guys did. And if you guys hide, they argue with me. They say, look, he's at 12 cavities. I think you ought to have 3 checks on him, Willie. I think you ought to be able to use them on heifers. And I said, no, I don't think so. I'm calling him a break bull. He's a 2 check. You ought to use him on cows, not heifers. No, Willie, I think you're wrong. I think he's a cavities bull. I said, no, I don't think you ought to use him on heifers. And it was really great how much of an educational tool that is. It's nice to have a commercial breeder want to argue with you about cavities.
Yep. And I think one of these days we'll see a progressive leading breed association quit publishing Berkeley EPD. They'll say, we realize we've got the Cavanese direct EPD, nobody needs the Berkeley EPD, we're not going to publish it on our website, we're not going to publish it in our sire summary, and I won't be surprised if it's Simmental that has done that, because you guys have been leaders in terms of taking a progressive stance in the past.
You know, we have huge databases in all the breeds. And we talk about genomics and EPDs and so on, but every once in a while, we ought to just go back and see what the data tells us in our breeds. In the Angus breed, the black Angus breed, there is zero Cavanese advantage for any bull that's over a Cavanese direct 6. So when you're looking for double-digit Cavanese and so on, you're just really limiting your selection for bulls, because you're not going to get any less Cavanese. So at Nichols Farms, we consider a heifer bull one that's Cavanese 5. And because that's what the data tells us on thousands of calves. And so I think while we talk about genomics and all these things, once in a while, it just makes sense to go back and look at some of the raw data and see what it tells us.
Jared, in your study, this study, and I think you're just collecting data.
Yep.
Now, I'll say you haven't had a chance to analyze anything, I'm assuming. What are you anticipating as far as the interaction? Are you anticipating to see, and I would imagine that you're anticipating, depending on the trait, maybe more interaction than others, some traits, maybe no interaction. What are you anticipating based on the work that's been done in this area so far?
Yeah, so the work that's previously been done using like methods called like reaction norms or some of those things, they've seen a relatively large effect in the Gulf Coast. That's where they've seen kind of the most.
On which traits?
I think most of that stuff that Bill Lamberson has done, they were looking at weaning weight. And so in our research, what we were planning on doing was trying to focus on some more of the maternal traits. So the weaning weights, perhaps the mature weights, the maternal effect on growth, so what we call milk, some of those things where the cow is in the environment under that stress. Some of the things like carcass traits, you know, if an animal is in a feedlot and managed similar to all the other cattle that are in a typical feedlot in the United States, I think we have less chance for re-ranking, just because when we get to that level, that sector of production, we're doing more in terms to manage the environment. So we're planning on trying to focus on the maternal side of things, where the cow and the calf is out in the diverse environments. The other thing that I'll say to your point is Mike McNeil of Delta Genetics. He is going to take the various EPD profiles and look for those traits that appear to be most strongly influenced by the environment. So we think what McNeil's research is going to point us to is the maternal side of things, but we're going to do the research just to double check our assumptions.
So are you able to look at things, when you say maternal, are you able to look at things like fertility?
If we've got phenotypic records, you know, I think in terms, so we kind of have two pieces here. We have a selection scan piece where we're looking for, in the DNA, looking for footprints or signatures of the historical selection that has happened. And the other thing we're doing is these genomic predictions and genome-wide association type stuff. If we don't have a trait recorded, if we don't have enough records, we won't be able to do that genome-wide analysis type thing. But if there's been selection and those cows that are poorly adapted to the environment are coming up open and are being culled, we might see it in the signature of selection side of things.
The reason I ask that is my suspicion would be that if there are traits that are more susceptible than others to interaction, or the most susceptible to me would be fertility. I would think that would be most likely trait to see big interactions.
Yeah, so I think in your all's circumstance, we would probably need to analyze some of the raw data that goes into your stability predictions. I think that might pull out some of the things you're talking about.
I might follow up on that just a little bit, or maybe along the same lines, but Dr. Decker, you mentioned that, I'm not sure exactly how you put it, but you were going to open up a cell catalog, and you were going to be able to see 5 different regional EPDs. I've been a fairly large proponent of that, if you can be a proponent of it, because I don't hear anybody else talking about it over the last 10 years, but what breed association is going to give us that information? Who's going to give us that information in order for us to look at that?
Yeah, so I haven't had conversations with you all as much, but with some of the other breed associations, they've thrown out ideas like, so when you get on their website, they know your IP address. Based on that IP address, they can infer what region of the United States you're in, and so as a default, they can deliver to you the EPD set for that region of the United States. I think in some of the AI catalogs that the studs produce, is they'll produce stud books for different regions of the United States. I already think they're doing that a little bit. And so when they do that, when they print out those stud books for the Fescue belt, the EPDs that'll get printed in that book will be the Fescue belt specific EPDs. And basically how this will work is, this is USDA funded work. We'll do the research, we'll create resources, and then it's really up to the individual breed associations how they use or deploy those resources.
So maybe another statement. I guess there has been one breed association who has done research data in-house on this maybe 10 to 15 years ago. But there were so many drastic differences between high accuracy sires, and I don't know exactly how they divided up their regions, but at least with 5 regions, with high accuracy sires on multiple traits, and maybe traits closer to weaning, or closer to maternal, such as weaning, and not as much with yearling. But there were drastic differences, and their board at that time decided to table it. So.
And there's been other, there's been research in the past where, they had a USDA center in Brooksville, Florida, where they had Herefords. They had Miles City Herefords, of course, and they did a swap. They took females from Florida and took them to Miles City, and they took females from Miles City and they took them to Florida. They ranked them before that swap, they ranked them after that swap, and because we had that big gene by environment interaction, we had re-ranking of those animals between those 2 different regions.
Was that sizable? See, the way I recall that, I mean, when I talked to Mike McNeil about interactions, he used to poo-poo, I think at least, and I would think he'd be very, very in tune with that bit of research. And then so Mike Tess is not here, probably. So Mike Tess was here last night. Mike Tess actually did, he looked at interactions, he looked at the basic traits, the growth traits primarily. I think he may have looked at milk, I'm not sure, but and he looked at it in Semitol data, and this was probably 20 years ago, at least 25, and his conclusion wasn't enough interaction in those traits to be concerned about. Now, in fairness, I don't even recall the areas that he all looked in. I would think, you start talking about areas like the Gulf Coast where things are dramatically different, and Fescue and those kind of things. Certainly potential to really upset the apple cart, maybe.
And what database?
It was a Semitol database. It was our database 25, 30 years ago.
Yeah, and it might just be a few problematic regions. It might just be the high altitude, the Fescue Belt, and the Gulf Coast. And everywhere else kind of goes along fine with a national cattle evaluation EPD. So.
Jared, I think you're talking about the experiment where they took line 1 Herefords out of Montana to Florida, and then they took Brahmins back to Montana. And that's where they got their genetic environmental interaction, is because of those two distinct breeds. Dr. Willow at Iowa State, because you could see where Wool's progeny was by zip code, found out that there was far less genetic environmental interaction among weed and yearling weight than they previously thought there would be.
Yeah, and it might be one of these things where we're taking the genomics and trying to squeeze as much out of it as possible, right? Some of these effects might be relatively small, but if we can squeeze a little bit more out of the data, perhaps it'll be worth it. So it's a research project. We'll see what we see.
I'm just trying to figure out, you touched on environment, and Wade and I have spent a lot of time on the phone, and I'm just trying to figure out how you can take one index and breed for all the different needs of the seed stock people and the commercial people that we supply bulbs for. I mean, when you look at how that thing is weighted, that's a certain type of cattle that fit that criteria. How do you?
Yeah, so I lean pretty heavily on Mike McNeil's experience when it comes to selection indexes. And so Mike McNeil did an analysis where he created a selection index for Angus in South Africa, and he created an index for Angus cattle in North America. So to give you a little context about this, in South Africa, their cattle have to be small enough that somebody can pick that carcass up and move it around the kill floor just on their backs. So in terms of carcass size, we have really big differences. And so we have all the other production differences between South Africa and the United States. If we use the South African index to make selection decisions in the United States, or we use the United States index to make selection decisions in South Africa, we still do a relatively good job. The relationship, the correlation between those two indexes vary between 60 to 70%. So they're not perfect, but you still do a reasonably good job in those two very different environments by using one index. So I think the production system that we have in the U.S. is relatively similar compared to that difference between the U.S. and South Africa. And so I think that the index is doing a lot better job than we give it credit for. Some of these things that we worry about with our operation and its particulars, our intuition, again, I go back to that, our intuition might be leading us astray a little bit. And as we talked about, that selection index can just be our gate sort. We pick out the top X number of bulls, and then we go through those bulls and find the bull that we like the best.
I guess my question is, on this too, he says different bulls for different regions, different EPDs for different regions. The AI industry scatters semen from everywhere around the world. And how can you differentiate an EPD
on the number one Angus bull of the breed, let's just pick that deal, you know, and say, well, he works here, he doesn't work here, you know. The AI industry doesn't want that. They want to sell all the semen they can. You know, is there an accuracy that you can come up with that says that in different areas you use different bulls? Or is that just a perception, you know? I don't know. I send cows every year into Missouri, and I send potloads of them. You know, they're called cows that come open, and cattle trader down there buys them and stuff. And he says the way you get around the fescue thing is a mineral program that you feed them and such, but those cattle actually are working in that environment coming out of our country. But I don't believe that you can put a different EPD on the same bull for a different area and make that work really effectively. I think there's cattle to go everywhere. I guess we're fortunate. We send cattle to the south, the east, the west, and such. And I don't have very many people say that they don't work. I just want to know how you're gonna measure that.
So that's not been my personal experience, and that's not been the feedback that I've gotten from producers in Missouri. You know, when they go, let's say, so I've heard stories about, okay, you go to a select sires meeting, and they will tell you, here's the list of bulls that we think are going to work in Missouri. So I think we have a lot of stories and anecdotes about which bulls work well, and what I'm trying to do is put some data and some information behind those decisions.
We've got a classic example of genotype by environment interaction in brisket disease, right? We've got cattle that, you know, they do fine, and then all of a sudden you send their offspring up to 8,000 feet, and you got a bunch of dead calves, right? So there's a classic genotype, and I don't disagree with you. Having worked in fescue country, you can't take every genetics and put it in fescue country and see it work. So I think there are, and I think the point that's been raised is, other than trial and error, how do you create a situation that people can understand? I think some of that is, as you talked about, as breeders, helping your customers understand, you know, when Noel Crest Farms out of Virginia produces bulls, they know they're going to work on fescue in that kind of country. In Missouri, the same way with Circle A. And some of those breeders, that you know those cattle are going to work in that environment. And the same thing is true with the Western cattle. I'm not saying that there aren't cattle that we have that are good Western cattle that won't work everywhere, but there are certain environments that I think we're not doing our customers a favor if we try and put those cattle just everywhere. And those AI bulls, they filter out, right? Those bulls that kind of work in all environments, they show up. And then there's bulls that work great in one part of the country and maybe not so hot in others.
And if you're in the West, you might identify a bull that would be a rock star in the Gulf Coast, but in the West, he's pretty average, you know? So it might open up some marketing opportunities there, you know? I don't know, I'm not a futurist, I don't predict the future, but. Great, appreciate it.
All right, so next on the agenda, we're going to have some of our folks from GNC come and just discuss with you about some of their products and what their service and what they have to offer. Again, they're a corporate sponsor, and we really appreciate them and their support of this event. we've heard a lot about genotyping and genomics today, and so I think they might also appreciate this event as well. I think that it ties very nicely with what they're trying to do, and we've worked really well with GeneSeek, and they've done a lot of we've got a lot of innovative technology in the pipeline that we got to hear about, and Michael Wells from GeneSeek is going to visit with you for a couple of minutes.
Thank you, Jackie. Good day, good day, good day. How's everybody doing? All right. Does anybody else feel like you've been drinking from a fire hose all day long? I know I have, certainly. And despite that fact, I still find myself getting quite parched, to be honest. So I hope to keep this informative, yet brief, which I know sometimes people see as salesmen with a microphone, and those two things do not go together. But again, I'm going to try to break the mold and break into the future. So I am Michael Wells. I am the U.S. Sales Director for Beef with GeneSeek. We are based in Lincoln, Nebraska. That's where the home office is, the head nerdery, as I call it. We have 8 genomic ambassadors, as I say, or territory sales managers that work there. We have 2 with us here today. We have Dr. Jim Gibb in the back. Good day, Dr. Gibb. He lives in Colorado and covers the western states. In the very back corner, where all the troublemakers sit, we have Dr. John Patterson. And he is, of course, your local rep here in the beautiful state of Montana. We have 6 other genomic ambassadors spread throughout the countryside. Rick Formiller's in Kansas and Oklahoma, or Kansas and Nebraska, actually. We just added Miss Audrey Daniel to the state of Oklahoma just this past week. So we have Jill Ginn in Texas. We have Gary lives in Missouri, covers that part of the world, and then Dr. Ashby Green lives in Florida, and we have Miss Shelby Steele that does North Dakota, South Dakota, Minnesota, all the OTA states. So we have pretty good coverage around, and we are here today because we are proud to be the genomic testing partners with Symantec. So when you take your little sample and you throw it in the mail, and it goes to beautiful Lincoln, Nebraska, and we beep, bop, beep it, and it comes out and goes through your system, we're the ones touching it. So we have 30,000 square foot facility, 130 people working pretty much around the clock. We are the largest agrigenomics provider in the world. So we have a lab in Brazil, we have a lab in Lincoln, we have a lab in Ayr, Scotland, and soon to be somewhere in the extreme southern hemisphere, we're adding another one to that list as well. So, you know, we have a variety of offerings. I got the same question about 7 times when I was in the lobby area. What tests do y'all have now? Basically, anything you need. So we have, for this association, you know, if you have your donor dams and your elite sires, we have the high density test we do for that. For everybody else, we have a low density. We have some new products coming out fairly soon to help address this issue and this opportunity of gathering a lot more genotypical and phenotypical data at the same time. And we also do quite the spectrum on diseases and parentage and anything else you might dream up. And so we have a full line of the I say everyday DNA. That sounds kind of funny to say out loud, but that's where we're at. And then we do quite a bit on the research side as well with what we call the F250. So we've talked about some of the stuff that Dr. Taylor's doing, and Dr. Decker, and Dr. Garrett, and everybody else. And so we are very, very proud of the research that we get to do as well in the universities we work with and the stellar associations such as yourself. So I wanted to take the opportunity to say thank you, and we look forward to the phenomenal future and growing together even more. If you have questions, track us down, we'll be here. If at any time you find yourself in the Lincoln, Nebraska area, A, call, but B, you're more than welcome to come by and check out our lab. It is quite impressive to wander around and see all the stuff that goes into when that sample hits the reception room, goes through all the phases, and finally hits the data and comes out the other side. So it's quite amazing. We're very proud of what we get to do and we get to work with you. And I don't want to keep you guys too much longer, but thank you. Thank you very much. We're very glad to be here.
All right, and Dale's gonna close this up for us and give us some details on tomorrow.
Thanks Jackie and Lauren for moderating today. It's a super program, good speakers, this was great. 8:30 in the morning, back in the same room, I believe, is the start of our interactive board meeting. And at this point, before I let you all release, I would like to call on Jimmy Holloman to do an invocation for the meal tonight, means we won't have you captive with a mic for the rest of the evening, so we'll just do it right here, and thanks Jimmy for handling this.
Let us pray. Father, we just thank you for this day and the many blessings that you give us every day. Father, we just thank you for this country, and we thank you for organizations such as ASA where we can come together and discuss issues on the industry that we love and have such passion for. We ask now that you bless this food, bless those that prepare it and those that grow it. In Christ's name we pray. Amen.
Thanks, Jim. I guess the reception or the evening hospitality is right out across the pool, and the meal will be served whenever it's ready, I guess. So enjoy yourself the rest of the evening. See you in the morning.